This has been an amazing set. This has been an amazing set of presentations today. And coming as I do at the end of this particular panel, at the very end of the day, I can't help but feel, in referencing an icebreaker first made by Russell Akoff in a talk about continual improvement, that my presentation will come off a bit like a pornographic film being shown to an audience that has just engaged in a lot of sex. So apologies in advance. So just to give my company a little lip service before I get into what I think will be a very different talk. I run a digital design agency called Proving Ground. We work with architects and engineers, builders, and owners to apply and implement and find strategies for leveraging digital technology. And oftentimes that comes with an interesting duality of negotiating the specifics of the tools and the technology and the kind of stuff that I think we're all very excited by in venues like this, with then the kind of messy aspects of navigating cultural components of what it means to run organizations, dealing with things like change management, understanding the anxieties with which new technologies present in these systems, overcoming digital divides, and so on and so forth. So there's sort of a broad spectrum of things here. And but I'm not going to talk too much about this work. I kind of wanted to use my chance on this panel to maybe examine and talk a little bit more about the context with which we are currently operating within among the often very hyped world of AI. And I think in general, the innovation initiatives that are often present in many of our firms today. And I think we've heard versions of this throughout the day. And again, this is referencing a concept introduced by Peter Drucker, a specialist in systems thinking and management consulting that distinguishes between doing things right and doing the right thing. And as I kind of observe, in some ways from a distance and try to be as detached as possible, the trajectory that we're following with AI, machine learning, and new technology in general, and I think technology innovation initiatives that we see among firms, I can't help but question if we're preoccupied with doing the wrong things right. Many technology innovation initiatives are doing a lot of things really right, but they may be doing the wrong thing. I can't tell you how often it is. I think it's almost on a daily basis, scrolling through my LinkedIn feeds about technology and seeing parking lot generators, right? Which operate with a bracing efficiency. They capture the code. They capture the circulation systems required for really good parking. But can we say, as a culture and a society, we need more parking lots? Where is the parking reduction generator? Where are these things that we know can make the world arguably a better place, as opposed to reinforcing the maybe the failures of the past? And I think that goes as well with what we see in among the kind of test fitting tools present today. I can't help but see massing generators that some ways feel like they're haunted by our modernist failures in history, such as Pruitt-Igoe and so on. These kind of soulless generators of projects that may very well capture the performa of a developer or things like that, but ultimately result in things that are scary, very scary in terms of their kind of urban quality. And then when we look at the last 3 years of the pandemic, I remember in 2019 and prior, companies like WeWork and anyone operating within the corporate commercial sphere were obsessed with layout tools for corporate commercial office, desk layout tools, and ways to figure out how we can optimize and pack people into office spaces. And now in 2023, as almost a post-pandemic hangover, if we can call it a post-pandemic, I think that is very much up for debate. We see one of the highest levels of corporate commercial vacancy, and a very much a softening of that just economy in general. And I can't help but wonder, where are those layout tools today? Are they collecting now dust on the servers of the various architecture firms and developers that employed them? So much of my critique, I think, thankfully, a lot of the presentations that we just saw escape some of what I'll be talking about here. So in some ways, the lens here is going to be focused on, again, the more sort of popular aspects that we're talking about as we get into AI. But I want to keep this in mind, this idea that we got to be careful about confusing innovation with making the status quo more efficient. And I think the danger of any kind of application of new technology is it's not only the ability to sort of extend creativity and take us to new places, but it can also, and I think in the case is especially true in artificial intelligence, that it can reinforce the status quo and systems of power that are continuing to kind of drive impacts in areas such, political impacts, environmental impacts, social and economic impacts, and so on. So let's talk a little bit of artificial intelligence. It occurs to me that, sidebar for a minute, why is it that when we use the word artificial in just about any other context, we're immediately skeptical about it? Artificial sweetener? Anyone? Who likes artificial sweetener? Is anyone here proposed marriage with an artificial diamond? I don't know. I think there's sort of, it's interesting to me that when we tack on intelligence, especially in sort of the world of popular media and the popular culture that kind of surrounds artificial intelligence, once you put the word intelligence behind it, we're like, wow, artificial intelligence. And it's like a lot of the sort of sci-fi world, the context that we're kind of enter into, kind of all of a sudden triggers a sort of imagination. But really, we're dealing with this form of statistical estimation processes that have been, I think, fairly well established for a long time, but are now kind of achieving a level of hype, probably because of their ease of use, and accessibility. ChatGPT, Midjourney, Stability Fusion, and all that stuff. But it kind of occurs to me, why are we so excited? Why are we getting into this? And what I want to do here is maybe expand on some of the critical vectors that Matthias, you talked about early on in your talk, and maybe I'll delve into a few areas here that often go unaddressed in many of our conversations today. AI can be racist. It's kind of, I think, more common to talk about this, underlying biases that exist in extremely large data sets, and a general critical concern that as we interrogate our outputs, we should be considering some of the underlying factors that are leading those outputs. This stuff is not coming up with ideas on its own. It's trained by us. It is using our data. It is using who we are. And sometimes who we are isn't very pretty. And the danger then becomes how AI, being an extremely advanced set of technologies, might be used to reinforce these things in undesirable ways. But one of the things that is novel about AI is the fact that, being a mathematically driven kind of system, we can say, if we get into the training data, we can make deliberate attempts at eliminating such bias. We can go in and flip some of those ones to zeros. We can start to scrub these data sets. But here's where we start to see a bit of a mechanical Turk in operation. Who is labeling these data sets? Who is going through the labor of ensuring that these data sets are suitable and bias-free? And here we see a classic form of global exploitation in play at the core of what we often think of as a forward-thinking technology. Earlier this year, Time reported on Kenyan workers earning less than $2 an hour being exposed to extremely graphic images of people and text in order to go through the tedious problem of labeling this thing. And in addition to this, reports of the mental health of these workers being dramatically impacted by such an activity. It's terrible. And I think even when we look at sort of private data sets, we ultimately need to confront who is doing this work. And how are we doing? And it's being done on the cheap because it is such an expensive kind of activity to garner data sets that can operate in such a powerful way. Are we comfortable with surveillance as a society and the centralization of the data collected through such surveillance? It seems to me that this stuff is made possible by us giving up something, right? The idea of smarter buildings, the idea of being able to optimize on the fly with the Internet of Things and have AIs, start to support this idea is in us kind of entering into a contract that says our data can be used in the system, and some of us are not aware of this. And I don't know about you, surveillance states, especially in today's era of political turmoil across the globe, it's kind of scary. And here comes my prop. Artificial intelligence is an energy hawk. And we oftentimes couch it in this idea like, oh, well, we can use this to solve the energy crisis or solve the global climate crisis. And that very well may be true. It can be used to identify such patterns. As we saw, I think some very ethical and meaningful uses in some of these past presentations. But we also have to be aware of some of the impacts. A common set of exchanges that you might have with ChatGPT, standard average short conversation might be 20, 30 kind of back and forth exchanges, is the equivalent of a 500 milliliter bottle of water. When you think about the training of such a system, you're talking about the life cycle of 3 automobiles, the carbon life cycle of 3 automobiles on the road today, or a transatlantic flight across the ocean. As it turns out, these systems aren't very smart either. And if we're not careful, we're entering into a condition where our professional liability, our professional value may very well be challenged in different contexts. This stuff is both funny and scary. Here, an attorney deciding to use ChatGPT to cite case law, and as it turns out, the AI hallucinated case law that did not exist. And I can only speak from personal experience, having to try, you always get curious, right? Let's see if ChatGPT can write some code for me. I have never been able to have a ChatGPT produce code compile without some serious editing. And I think that's important to recognize those kinds of limitations. Oh, and by the way, we don't own anything on its own, unless we're operating with some serious critical creative post-processing as a way to kind of convey these ideas. But it's sort of interesting, if we start to keep score and look at where things are going today, we have now this tool that is locked into, that is, embedded with certain forms of bias, is an energy hog. It has these components of labor exploitation embedded within it. We have the this idea that we're not owning any of the kind of output. And to me, it's less about like, is this thing going to take away our jobs? I don't know. We can talk about that. Or is it going to enable a certain race to the bottom when it comes to the sort of standards by which we operate? And we need to be cautious and careful with that. So a way forward, I don't know. But what I will say that when it comes to a lot of the talks that I saw here today, that I found most interesting, is that there are a few clues that might start to suggest how we start to situate these technologies in different meaningful ways within sort of a creative pipeline. I'm interested in the pipeline. I'm interested in how creative individuals can start to leverage this idea of data collection, how they can start to train AI and MLs for very specific purposes. But I think there's also this notion of thinking about what we want out of this, right? So a couple of points here. There's this idea of the best tool for the job. We've heard that phrase, I think, a few times here at this session, the idea that I think it's easy to kind of look at something so enticing as AI and think of every sort of problem that we have as resolvable through artificial intelligence, when in fact, there may be better tools, far more responsible tools, and tools that are far more well established to solve the problems that we have. We can't look at it through the lens of being, oh yeah, let's use AI for this. And we're starting to see this, of course, in venture capital. It's like you have to have AI in any pitch deck, otherwise, where are you going to get the capital? Position tools and data training driven by what we want. I think the idea that creativity is woven into the process with the output, and outputs can be audited, evaluated, and tuned in ways with which we can have influence over them. I'm just going to talk very briefly about maybe a very modest contribution to this whole thing. This is Lunchbox plugin that has a couple of ML components built into them. And I think these start to exemplify a couple of the points I'd like to make in terms of this overall understanding of a pipeline, how it might start to be woven into processes today. The tool that we have published, and this is open source and completely free for anyone to kind of use and try out. It exposes tools for data collection and training, a number of architectural problems sitting at the core of this, the idea of understanding spatial composition, adjacencies, and things like that, culminating in the creation of data sets that are vectorized and can be used for the purposes of training. All of this is occurring on pretty mediocre hardware and equipment, pretty conventional stuff, and is kind of exposing this kind of level of control over, again, labeling processes and vectorization. There's this notion of algorithm selection, kind of putting the designer in a position where they are able to evaluate the differences in performance from different algorithms and how they are performing relative to a problem set. So initiating certain forms of training, testing the parameters of those training algorithms, and seeing how they can then be tested to produce certain outputs. And the sort of feedback loop, the sort of mastery that a designer can have over a given pipeline, wherein they can kind of take things every step of the way, I think starts to stand in contrast to many of the large language models and tools that are widely available and popularized in media today, which don't expose this level of control. You're kind of the news networks want you to go to ChatGPT and talk about and start entering in prompts and things of that nature. That's why I was kind of really excited about some of the previous presentations, because they start to touch on very similar themes. The idea that, yes, we can have a level of control and input over every aspect of this process and apply them to creative means. So I'll leave the talk with this kind of question about our algorithms, and kind of think about AI as, if we position it in the context of a lot of those critiques I just mentioned, there's a tendency to have AI be used for means that reinforce the past and reinforce even probably some of the worst aspects of the data that are given to it. But if we take a step back, I think there's opportunities for us to look at training our algorithms with how we want things to be, and think about how it is useful for us for projecting forward into a design process and a world that we want. And I think that's a really hard question for everyone here, is what do we want? What do we want? What do we want to be? And not what we were. So I'll leave it at that.